Have you ever wondered exactly how trauma impacts your relationship? Maybe you've seen glimpses every now and then when you were able to reflect on a particular interaction. Maybe a moment of defensiveness or an emotional overreaction to something. Or maybe you felt your body go completely numb and became self-aware as it was happening. And in those moments you thought to yourself, I know what this is. This is my trauma. Today, we're going to outline 3 ways that trauma impacts your relationship so you are better able to recognize it when it happens. They say the first step to solving any problem is acknowledging it. Well, today we're going to acknowledge and shine a light on that part of ourselves that we often don't understand. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I have spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, the first impact trauma has on a relationship is with emotion regulation. Let me give you an example. I was working with a couple some time back, and they both were beginning to get rather emotional or heated in their communication, which is fine to a point. We want to be able to draw on our emotions and use the information to communicate our wants and needs. But when we become fused with our emotions or become one with them, then we lose the capacity to communicate and start using more of a reactive or protective part of ourselves. So was the case with this couple. Eventually, the male in this dyad became very agitated and began hyperventilating. I asked him to get up and walk around the room a bit, and he began using some mindful techniques to help calm him down and reduce his panic, which he was eventually able to do and was able to sit back down and continue the conversation. So in this example, he became so overregulated that he slipped out of his calm, connected part of himself that can actually communicate his needs, and his trauma began to emerge. He reacted with the protective part of himself that became so overwhelmed, he was thrown into a panic attack. Now, I could give you lots of examples of couples that have stormed out of the session, couples that have shut down and stopped talking, couples that have become frozen with fear, because all these are strategies and reactions to trauma that have emerged in the session. So when we talk about emotion regulation, therapists often reference what we call the window of tolerance. Now, imagine a window, if you will, just a normal, typical window, and open that window. Now, that part of the window that is open, that is when you are feeling most centered, calm, connected, confident, curious, compassionate, so on and so forth. That is the best part of you, the healthiest part of you, the part of you that has not been hurt by the trauma. That is your best self. And when you stay in that part of the window, you can integrate your thoughts and feelings. You can be mindful of them without being drowned in them. You can communicate your wants and needs, and you're able to respond rather than react automatically to your partner. Now picture everything above the window as your fight or flight response. This is the part of you that gets activated when you are triggered. And when this occurs, your emotions and body are highly activated. But your cognition is low, meaning that part of your brain that allows you to communicate effectively is not working, or it's offline. Finally, I want you to imagine everything below that window. This is your freeze response. This is where your body and mind go numb. You're unable to think clearly or use your words or draw on your emotions. You simply become disassociated, almost like you're in somebody else's body. This is what we mean by emotion regulation, that the trauma disrupts the ability for the individual to stay in the open part of the window. In fact, trauma actually shrinks that part of the window and makes it smaller, requiring more energy and more effort to stay regulated, which means the individual with trauma tends to spend more time dysregulated, either above or below the window. Now, the second impact trauma has on relationships is what we call a negative self-concept. This is when, due to the trauma, we hold on to beliefs about ourselves that become rigid, immutable, that they don't have a fluidness about them and a flexibility that allows us to be able to use them when it's useful, but discard them when it's not. Now, this can often be the part of us that holds the wound that says, I'm unlovable, I'm broken, I'm never enough, I'll never get the love I want, I'm stupid, helpless, worthless, I'm going to be abandoned or rejected. You get the idea. You could probably add your own lines there. This part of ourselves is like white noise in the background. In some cases, it's been there so long that we don't even notice it anymore. Hence the metaphor of the white noise. When you have a fan running at night, it actually might help you sleep because eventually you tune it out, but it's still there in the background. It's still operating. It's still running. You just don't notice it anymore. And so it usually resides in our semantic memory, meaning our nonverbal memory. And these negative self-concepts or negative core beliefs are largely unconscious. But here's an important point. Just because we don't recognize them doesn't mean that they're not still operating within us. So make no mistake about it, these core beliefs about ourselves are often driving the bus. And it uses our protection to help keep anyone and anything away from touching our wounds, which hold these core beliefs. I had a patient I was working with, and we were talking about the part of her that works so hard and needs everything just to be right. She really puts in a ton of effort into everything she does, which has sort of taken on a perfectionistic attitude in her world. She thinks that as long as she keeps her head down and works at her relationships, works at her job, works at raising her kids, then she can order her world so that bad things won't happen. As we were able to take a more compassionate approach to her protection that has come to be sort of rigid and even dominate her life, what we discovered under the protection is a tremendous fear of not being good enough. That's the negative core belief she holds, that she's not good enough. And that if things go wrong in her life, then something must be wrong with her, and that somehow she must be broken. If she cannot make this relationship work, then she doesn't deserve to have a relationship at all because something is wrong with her. That means she's defective in some way. That's the sort of core negative belief that she holds deep, deep down that she often doesn't recognize, that gives rise to this perfection and to this protection that she has to order her world in such a way and keep it running so succinctly and sufficiently so that nothing bad can happen. Or else, if it does, then it triggers that negative core belief. So hopefully that's an example of a negative self-concept or core belief. It often holds the shame, the pain, the terror from the trauma, and has taken on a generalized, judgmental attitude about ourselves, others, and the world. This part of us is so sensitive that it adds layers of protection to make sure that no one gets closer to our negative core belief. And maybe even more importantly, these negative core beliefs that are hard to identify shape our perceptions of our reality. as I said before, they often drive the bus. They're like a lens we use to view our interactions with others, especially our partner. And they help us architect our world so that we minimize the chances of being re-traumatized, but end up being more like a self-fulfilling prophecy at times. Meaning, because they are rooted in fear, and we use our protection to guard against anyone coming close to our wound, we find ourselves often in situations, the very situations we are trying to avoid. Now, the third and final way trauma disrupts our relationships is through the repairing of ruptures. Trauma, from my perspective, is the biggest disruptor of being able to repair our relationships. And I have seen this over and over and over. Now, all relationships have ruptures, times when we disagree, feel disconnected, or are simply not on the same page with our partner. They can be small ruptures or they can be large ruptures. But when this happens, it often triggers our trauma and prevents us from being able to make the necessary repairs to get back to a place of connection with our partner. And I actually contend that this is true with our friends, colleagues, siblings, or any other relationship we may have as well. The ability to repair ruptures when they happen is an essential life skill. And trauma is one of the biggest disruptors of being able to achieve the connection we desire in our relationship and being able to draw on the necessary skills to repair those ruptures when they happen. This is without question the bulk of the work that I do with couples, and it's why I'm on a mission to help as many as I can. Communication skills are fine. Learning to use I statements, passing the talking stick, all those are fine skills to have. But if we're not actually targeting the trauma that actually disrupts and prevents the repairing in our relationships, then we're missing the mark. And in my opinion, we're failing our clients, our couples, and our communities. So, in conclusion, we've discussed 3 ways that trauma impacts your relationship today. Now, I'm not going to go into how we heal these 3 different areas. I've got other podcasts that do that. But I wanted to create a new podcast that sort of helps put in perspective maybe what you're experiencing in your own relationship and the way trauma may impact your relationship. And so I want us to be able to target each of these 3 areas that we've spoken about so that you can better recognize how they might show up in your life, in your world, and especially in your relationships. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.